Greetings, warriors and dreamers. Welcome to the realms of sleep, where tonight we journey through the epic world of God of War. I am your guide through the 9 realms, where ancient gods whisper their secrets and mythic landscapes unfold before us. From the frost-covered mountains of Midgard to the golden halls of Asgard, these tales of gods and giants will carry you into peaceful slumber. Lay down your weapons, rest your weary head, and allow the legends of these powerful beings to become the landscape of your dreams. The battles have been fought, and now is the time for rest. So close your eyes, brave one. Let the fire of the hearth warm you as we begin our journey through realms both wondrous and dangerous. The air grew thick with the scent of iron and coal as Kratos and Atreus descended deeper into the ancient forges of Svartalheim. What had begun as a simple expedition to gather materials had led them down winding passages where the walls themselves seemed to pulse with residual heat from fires long extinguished. The soft glow of embers, somehow still alive after countless years of abandonment, cast their faces in a warm coppery light that made the shadows dance and twist around them like living things. "Father, look!" Atreus whispered, his voice carrying a note of wonder as he pointed toward a massive cavern opening before them. "I think we've found it. The grand forge that Brock mentioned." Kratos said nothing, but his pace slowed as they approached the entrance. His senses, honed by centuries of combat and countless encounters with the unexpected, detected nothing immediately threatening. Yet caution had become as natural to him as breathing. The dwarves of Svartalheim were known for their ingenuity in both creation and protection. Abandoned forges often housed defensive mechanisms that remained active long after their creators had departed. As they crossed the threshold into the Grand Forge, both father and son paused in silent appreciation of the vast space that opened before them. The cavern stretched upward into darkness too deep for even the ambient glow to penetrate, while the floor extended outward in tiered platforms, each hosting abandoned workstations. Massive chains hung from the unseen ceiling, supporting immense suspended crucibles and hammers that had once shaped metal for gods and giants alike. The entire chamber hummed with a subtle vibration, as if the very rock remembered the rhythm of countless hammers that had once beaten in perfect unity. "This forge was abandoned during the Aesir-Vanir War," came Mimir's voice from his position at Kratos' belt, when resources grew scarce and many of the master smiths were conscripted to forge weapons rather than create works of lasting beauty. Some say the dwarves sealed it themselves, refusing to let their sacred spaces be used solely for instruments of death. Atreus moved forward cautiously, his fingers trailing over the surface of a massive anvil that stood nearly as tall as he was. Its surface, though coated with the dust of centuries, still retained a mirror-like polish beneath, testament to the extraordinary care its owners had taken with their tools. Who would abandon such treasures, he wondered aloud, his voice soft with reverence. Those who valued what such treasures represented more than the objects themselves, Kratos answered, surprising both his son and Mimir with the unexpected philosophical response. He approached a workbench where tools lay precisely arranged, as if the artisan had intended to return moments later. The creator's hands hold more value than their creations. The boy considered this, his gaze moving from the tools to his own hands, which had grown calloused from bowstring and travel. "Like mother's knife," he said after a moment. "It matters because she made it, not just because of what it can do." A flicker of something, perhaps approval, perhaps simple acknowledgement, crossed Kratos' stern features before he returned to scanning their surroundings with tactical precision. "Stay close," he instructed. "We do not know what still lives within these depths." They moved deeper into the forge complex, passing workstations of increasing specialization. Some held intricate tools for delicate metalwork, others massive hammers that even Kratos would find substantial. Crucibles of various sizes stood positioned near channels carved into the stone floor, designed to direct molten metal toward molds embedded in lower platforms. The entire space represented a marvel of ancient engineering, combining practicality with an aesthetic that celebrated the materials and processes involved. As they proceeded, Atreus noticed that the ambient light seemed to shift and change around them, sometimes brightening as they passed certain workstations, as if responding to their presence. "The forge knows we're here," he whispered, not fearful, but filled with quiet wonder. "It's watching us." "Aye, lad," Mimir confirmed. The greatest dwarven forges were imbued with a form of awareness, not consciousness as we understand it, but a certain sensitivity to intent. They say master smiths could communicate with their forges, enter into a kind of partnership, where the very space participated in the act of creation. This explanation seemed to satisfy Atreus, who continued examining the abandoned stations with growing fascination. Each told partial stories, an unfinished blade still clamped in a vise, a helmet missing its final decorative elements, a shield bearing intricate knotwork that stopped abruptly at its lower edge. These incomplete works spoke of interrupted lives and suddenly abandoned ambitions, preserved in the timeless environment of deep stone. The boy stopped beside a particularly interesting piece, what appeared to be a ceremonial gauntlet with intricate inlays of gold and silver forming patterns that reminded him of constellations. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, each tiny star precisely positioned in relation to the others, forming a map of the night sky across the metal surface. He reached out, his fingers hovering just above the piece but not touching, respecting its antiquity and possible fragility. "Father, look at this one," he called softly. "It shows the stars, but differently than how they appear now. See how Tyr's constellation is positioned? It's shifted from where we see it today." Kratos approached, studying the stellar map with critical assessment. "The stars move over centuries," he observed. "This shows their positions from long ago." "Indeed," Mimir agreed. "What you're seeing, lad, is the sky as it appeared during the early reign of Odin, perhaps 5,000 years past. The dwarves were meticulous astronomers, using stellar positions to time certain metallurgical processes. Different alloys required specific cosmic alignments for optimal results, or so they believed. This revelation added another layer to Atreus' appreciation of dwarven craftsmanship, not just technical skill, but integration with natural cycles and cosmic patterns. A holistic approach to creation that considered factors beyond immediate material concerns. "They understood connections," he murmured, half to himself. "How everything affects everything else." As they moved away from the gauntlet, a soft metallic sound like distant wind chimes drew their attention toward a shadowed alcove they had not yet explored. The sound was delicate but distinct, clearly not produced by their movements or any obvious mechanical process within the forge. It carried a melody of sorts, simple but haunting, that seemed to beckon rather than warn. "What is that?" Atreus asked, instinctively moving closer to his father as the sound continued. Kratos tilted his head slightly, his enhanced senses analyzing the acoustic properties of the sound with tactical precision. "Not mechanical," he determined after a moment. "Too irregular, too intentional." "I believe you're hearing a songstone," Mimir suggested, his wooden features shifting in what might have been excitement. "Rare dwarven artifacts that captured sounds. Music, instructions, even stories within specially treated crystals. They activate in response to compatible presences. Which raises interesting questions about why one would respond to U2. This explanation, rather than satisfying Atrios's curiosity, only intensified it. He looked up at his father, silently requesting permission to investigate further. After a moment's consideration, Atrios nodded once, not enthusiastic encouragement, but pragmatic acceptance, that understanding their surroundings served their security as much as their mission. They approached the alcove cautiously, the chime-like sounds increasing in clarity and complexity as they drew nearer. The shadowed space gradually revealed itself as a small chamber separated from the main forge area by a partial wall of intricately carved stone. Beyond this division lay what appeared to be a relaxation area. Benches arranged in a semicircle around a central fire pit, shelves holding what might have been recreational items rather than tools, and niches cut into the walls that once likely held refreshments or personal belongings. A rest space, Kratos observed with practical assessment, for periods between work. The dwarven equivalent of a mead hall on smaller scale, Mimir elaborated. Even the most dedicated craftsmen required periods of relaxation and socialization. Creating together builds stronger bonds than simply working alongside one another. In the center of this space, suspended from the ceiling by a thin chain of some dark metal, hung a crystal about the size of Atreus's fist. Unlike typical quartz or common gems, this crystal shifted colors as they observed it. Sometimes deep blue like twilight sky, sometimes amber like forge fire, occasionally silver like polished metal. The chime-like sounds emanated directly from this suspended stone, increasing in tempo and complexity as they drew closer. That's it. A songstone of exceptional quality, Mimir confirmed, and it seems particularly interested in you, lad. Perhaps it recognizes something in your unique heritage. Atreus approached slowly, his natural curiosity tempered by the caution his father had instilled. As he drew within arm's length of the crystal, the sounds organized themselves into a more distinct melody, still wordless, but now clearly recognizable as a work song, the kind that might coordinate the movements of multiple craftsmen working in rhythmic unity on a complex project. It's beautiful, the boy whispered, transfixed by the shifting colors and sounds. Like it's trying to tell a story without words. Music often preceded language in many traditions, Mimir explained, particularly for dwarves, who understood that certain rhythms and tones could influence metal at molecular levels in ways words never could. A master smith's most guarded secrets were often encoded in melodies rather than written instructions, comprehensible only to those with properly trained ears. As they listened, the song evolved, incorporating new elements that seemed to respond to their specific presence. Deeper tones that resonated with Kratos' natural frequency, higher notes that complemented Atreus' faster heartbeat. The effect was oddly harmonious, creating a composition that acknowledged their differences while weaving them into coherent whole. It's adapting to us, Atreus realized, his expression showing both wonder and slight uncertainty at being so specifically perceived by an inanimate object. Learning who we are. Before Kratos could respond, the crystal's light intensified briefly, and the music shifted again, now incorporating distinct words in ancient Dwarven, spoken or perhaps sung by multiple voices that overlapped and harmonized in complex patterns. Though neither father nor son understood the specific language, the emotional content carried clearly welcome, assessment, and gradually approval. They're greeting us, Mimir translated, his usual scholarly detachment colored by evident excitement. acknowledging our presence and, this is fascinating, determining our intentions. The Songstone contains not just recordings, but interactive elements, residual consciousness of the smiths who created it, preserved in crystalline matrix and activated by compatible energy signatures. This explanation might once have troubled Kratos, whose experiences with preserved consciousness had typically involved malevolent spirits or deceptive divine mechanisms. Yet something in the quality of the music, its straightforward assessment rather than manipulative seduction, suggested a different order of interaction. Rather than attempted domination. After what seemed like careful evaluation, the crystal's emissions changed once more, the music simplifying into clear, rhythmic patterns, while the light stabilized into a steady amber glow that illuminated the rest space with warm, firelight-like radiance. The effect transformed the abandoned chamber, making it feel inhabited and purposeful once more, as if time had temporarily reversed to when dwarven craftsmen gathered here between periods of intense creation. "It's accepted us," Atri said with quiet certainty. "Decided we belong here. Not merely accepted," Mimir corrected gently. "It's offering something. Listen carefully to the pattern now. It's instructional, designed to convey specific information through rhythmic encoding." Both father and son focused on the evolved sound pattern, which had indeed organized itself into something resembling language without words, repetitive sequences with subtle variations that seemed to emphasize certain beats while subordinating others. After several repetitions, Atreus's expression brightened with emerging comprehension. "It's pointing somewhere," he said, turning slowly until he faced a specific direction indicated by particular acoustic emphasis. "That way, deeper into the forge complex." Kratos, who had been conducting his own analysis of the pattern, nodded agreement. "A guidance mechanism," he observed, "leading towards something considered significant. Most likely what we were sent to find," Mimir suggested. Brock mentioned knowledge worth more than gold hidden in the depths. Perhaps this songstone was created specifically to guide worthy visitors toward whatever the ancient masters considered their most valuable legacy. With this potential confirmation of their mission's purpose, they prepared to follow the musical guidance deeper into the forge complex. As they moved away from the rest space, the songstone's emissions adjusted again, the amber light extending outward to illuminate their path, while the sound organized itself into a clear, directional signal that indicated correct choices at intersections, or when multiple passages presented themselves. Their guided journey led them through sections of the forge they might otherwise have overlooked, specialized workshops hidden behind illusory walls, testing chambers concealed beneath what appeared to be solid floor, observation platforms positioned to provide comprehensive views of operations that required coordination between multiple work areas. Throughout, the songstone's light and sound maintained consistent guidance, adjusting to their pace and occasionally pausing when particularly significant features warranted additional attention. "It's giving us a tour," Atreides realized as they paused beside an extraordinary water management system that channeled liquid from unknown sources through heating and cooling stages with remarkable precision, showing us how everything worked together. "Not just showing," Kratos observed, his tactical mind recognizing patterns in the presentation. "Training. Building understanding in specific sequence." This insight proved accurate as their guided exploration continued, each revealed area building conceptually upon previous discoveries, creating comprehensive understanding of the forge's operations and underlying principles rather than simply showcasing impressive features. The teaching methodology reminded Atreus of how his mother had instructed him, establishing foundations before introducing complexity, ensuring core concepts were grasped before adding nuance and exception. Eventually, their acoustic guide led them to a section of the forge complex set apart from the industrial areas, a transition marked by architectural shifts from purely functional design to more aesthetically considered spaces. Here, the walls bore intricate carvings rather than tool mounts. The floors displayed inlaid patterns of various metals, forming symbolic representations of cosmic and natural cycles, and the ambient light emanated from specially treated crystals embedded in precisely calculated positions throughout the space. The contemplation chambers, Mimir identified with reverent tone, where master smiths would meditate on particularly challenging creative problems, seeking inspiration beyond technical solutions. Few outsiders were ever permitted entry to these spaces, considered sacred by traditional dwarven craftsmen. As they proceeded through these progressively more elaborate chambers, the Songstone's guidance became gentler, less directive, suggesting rather than commanding, inviting deeper attention rather than simply indicating direction. The effect encouraged them to slow their pace, observe details more carefully, and allow impressions to form naturally rather than through focused analysis. In this receptive state, they began noticing elements that might otherwise have escaped attention. How light from different sources created intentional overlapping patterns at certain times. How acoustic properties of various chambers harmonized when experienced in specific sequence. How temperature gradients subtly influenced physical and mental states when moving between areas. The cumulative effect suggested design consciousness operating at levels far beyond mere functionality or even conventional aesthetics. He built thinking into the space itself, Atreus said softly as this understanding crystallized. Not just a place to think, but a place that actually participates in the thinking. An architectural extension of consciousness, Mimir agreed. The dwarves understood that environment shapes thought as surely as thought shapes creation. These chambers were designed to stimulate specific cognitive processes considered essential for master-level innovation. Kratos, though less verbally responsive to these philosophical aspects, demonstrated his own form of appreciation through careful observation and occasional tactile exploration, his massive hands sometimes resting on carved surfaces with surprising gentleness, testing temperature variations or subtle vibrations with the same precision he typically applied to weapons assessment. Though his expression remained characteristically stoic, his engagement suggested recognition of craftsmanship that transcended mere technical skill. Their guided journey culminated at a circular chamber positioned at what appeared to be the geometric center of the contemplation complex. Unlike previous spaces, this room contained almost no decorative elements. Its walls, floor, and domed ceiling formed from single pieces of stone, so perfectly fitted that no seams were visible, even upon close inspection. The only features breaking this minimalist perfection were 7 niches spaced equidistantly around the perimeter, each containing a small stone pedestal supporting what appeared to be ordinary river rocks of various colors. As they entered this central chamber, the Songstone's emissions changed dramatically, light concentrating into a focused beam directed toward the center of the room, while sound organized into a complex harmonic structure that caused the entire space to resonate like an instrument. The acoustic effect was not uncomfortable, but decidedly unusual, creating sensation of being inside music rather than simply hearing it. "What is this place?" Atreus asked, his voice automatically lowering to avoid disrupting the room's delicate acoustic balance. "If I'm not mistaken," Mimir answered with similar restraint, "you're standing in the legendary thought sphere." Ivaldi's personal meditation chamber and the birthplace of his most revolutionary concepts. Few living beings have ever seen this space, let alone entered it. The name Ivaldi clearly held significance beyond Mimir's academic interest, as the Songstone's emissions intensified at its mention, light pulsing in what almost resembled excitement, while harmonic structure incorporated new elements that suggested confirmation or approval. The response reinforced the growing impression that their guide possessed not just programmed functions, but something approaching genuine awareness. Who was Ivaldi? Atreus directed his question to Mimir, recognizing the severed head's encyclopedic knowledge of Norse mythology and history. Only the greatest dwarven craftsman in history, Mimir replied, his tone suggesting this should be common knowledge. Creator of treasures beyond price, inventor of techniques that transformed the very concept of making. When the Aesir-Vanir conflict began, consuming all craftsmanship for war, he reportedly retreated to his deepest forge and was never seen again, though some believed he found ways to preserve his knowledge for worthy successors. As this explanation concluded, the Songstone's beam shifted focus, directing their attention toward the center of the chamber, where the convergence of acoustic patterns created visible disturbance in the air. Like heat waves rising from sun-baked stone, but more structured and intentional in movement, this atmospheric phenomenon gradually organized itself into recognizable form. Not solid but distinctly humanoid, roughly 4 feet tall with broad shoulders and intricate beard, characteristic of dwarven physiology, but composed of light and sound rather than flesh or conventional matter. By Yggdrasil's deepest roots, Mimir whispered, awe evident in his typically composed voice. A thought-form manifestation. Ivaldi's teaching projection, preserved all these centuries. The luminous figure inclined its head slightly in what might have been acknowledgement of Mimir's identification, then turned its attention fully toward Kratos and Atreus. Though it lacked clearly defined facial features, its posture and movements conveyed distinct personality. Dignified but not pretentious, authoritative but not domineering, attentive but not invasive. It studied them for several moments, its form occasionally shifting as if adjusting perspective or focus, before extending a hand toward the nearest niche, containing one of the seemingly ordinary stones. The indicated stone, deep green with subtle patterns visible beneath its surface, rose gently from its pedestal and floated toward the dwarf form, hovering between its luminous hands, where it began to glow with inner light that matched the manifestation's own radiance. As this illumination intensified, the stone's surface seemed to become transparent, revealing complex crystalline structure within that resembled architectural diagrams or perhaps molecular arrangements, shifting and reconfiguring as they observed. A knowledge stone, Mimir explained in hushed tones, not simply recorded information, but encoded experience. The crystallized essence of understanding achieved through decades of dedicated exploration and practice. The dwarves developed these when they realized certain concepts could not be adequately conveyed through conventional instruction. The luminous dwarf form gestured toward Atreus, clearly indicating he should approach and observe more closely. After receiving a subtle nod of permission from his father, the boy moved forward cautiously, his natural curiosity balanced by appropriate respect for the extraordinary circumstances. As he drew nearer, the glowing stone rotated slowly, presenting different facets that revealed various aspects of whatever knowledge it contained. I can almost understand it, Itreed said softly, his gaze fixed on the shifting patterns. Not like reading words, but more like feeling concepts forming directly in my mind. It's about metal, about how it remembers, how it carries impressions of what happens to it, like experiences. The dwarf form nodded, apparently pleased with this interpretation, then extended the stone closer to Atreus, not forcing it upon him but clearly offering more direct connection if he chose to accept. The boy looked back at Kratos, silently seeking guidance for this unexpected development. Kratos studied the luminous figure with his characteristic intensity, assessing potential threat or deception with the experience of centuries. After several moments, he gave a single, measured nod, not enthusiastic encouragement, but pragmatic acceptance, that genuine knowledge was being offered without obvious malicious intent. Reassured by his father's judgment, Atreus carefully extended his hands toward the glowing stone, not quite touching but close enough to feel subtle warmth radiating from its surface. As this proximity established, the stone's illumination intensified briefly, and the boy gasped softly as information flowed directly into his awareness. Not overwhelming, but certainly more immediate than conventional learning. "It's amazing," he whispered, eyes widening as concepts organized themselves within his understanding. They discovered that metal retains memories of how it's worked. Every hammer strike, every heating and cooling, every fold and bend, and they developed techniques to speak to the metal, to ask it what it wants to become, instead of just forcing it into shapes. While Atreus received this initial knowledge transfer, the dwarf form turned its attention toward Kratos, studying him with what appeared to be specific interest in the Leviathan axe secured at his back. After several moments of silent assessment, it gestured toward a different niche, containing a stone of deep blue coloration. This second stone rose and approached Kratos directly, hovering before him at precisely chest height, not demanding but definitely offering itself for his consideration. Unlike his son, Kratos maintained greater distance, his instinctive caution toward unexpected magical phenomena asserting itself despite the apparently benign nature of the interaction. Yet neither did he reject the offering outright, his practical recognition of valuable knowledge overriding suspicion that might otherwise have dominated his response. "It appears to be offering weapon-specific knowledge," Mimir observed from his position at Kratos' belt, perhaps recognizing your particular expertise and interests. Vivaldi was renowned for combat innovations as well as artistic creations. He simply insisted that weapons serve protective rather than conquering purposes. After careful consideration, Kratos extended his hand toward the blue stone, not quite touching but acknowledging the offered exchange. The stone responded immediately, its glow intensifying as it projected information with remarkable precision, targeting specific aspects of combat mechanics and metallurgical principles directly relevant to Kratos' established capabilities, rather than attempting comprehensive knowledge transfer. Efficient, he observed after several moments of this focused exchange. A single word that nonetheless contained genuine appreciation for the stone's selective approach to sharing information. Throughout these interactions, the central dwarf form maintained its position, occasionally adjusting its luminous presence to facilitate optimal communication, but otherwise allowing the knowledge stones to function independently. Its posture suggested patience born of confidence rather than passive waiting, the demeanor of a master teacher, comfortable with allowing students to absorb information at their own pace and according to their own capacities. As both Kratos and Atreus completed their initial knowledge exchanges, the dwarf form gestured toward the remaining 5 stones in their niches around the chamber's perimeter. The movement clearly indicated that additional knowledge was available if desired, but without pressure or expectation, offering rather than insisting, respecting choice rather than demanding compliance. "Father, there's so much here," Atreus said, his voice containing wonder without the overwhelming excitement that might once have characterized his response to such discovery. Not just techniques, but whole philosophies about creation and purpose, about how making something carries responsibility for its effects in the world. Kratos nodded, the blue stone's contribution having conveyed similar principles specific to combat applications. How weapon design influenced not just effectiveness, but tendency towards specific uses. How creators could encourage defensive rather than aggressive implementation through subtle metallurgical and balance choices. Intention built into form, he summarized, his deep voice resonating with the chamber's acoustics in a way that suggested harmony rather than disruption. The dwarf form appeared pleased with their understanding, its luminous presence brightening momentarily before it gestured toward a specific section of the chamber's wall that had previously appeared entirely smooth and featureless. As its attention focused there, subtle lines became visible in the stone surface, gradually revealing the outline of what appeared to be a doorway or perhaps a storage compartment concealed through extraordinary craftsmanship rather than obvious magical means. A hidden repository, Mimi identified, his scholarly excitement evident despite attempts at professional restraint. Likely containing physical records or artifacts that complement the knowledge stone's more abstract transmissions. Ivaldi was known for comprehensive documentation alongside his more esoteric preservation methods. The outlined section of wall receded smoothly into the floor, revealing a small chamber beyond, not much larger than a generous closet, but arranged with meticulous attention to efficient storage. Shelves lined the walls, supporting carefully organized scrolls, bound volumes, material samples, and small demonstration models that appeared to illustrate specific techniques or principles. Unlike many ancient repositories, everything appeared perfectly preserved, protected from time's usual degradation by whatever combination of craftsmanship and subtle enchantment Ivaldi had employed. Atreus approached this revealed storage space with appropriate reverence, careful not to disturb the precise arrangement as he examined its contents. "These are physical instructions," he observed after studying several of the scrolls without actually handling them. "Step-by-step guides for specific techniques, with diagrams and material specifications. Exactly what Brock was hoping we might find." The dwarf form nodded confirmation, then made a sweeping gesture that clearly indicated permission to take what they needed from the repository. This generous offering was accompanied by subtle shifts in the songstone's acoustic patterns, variations that Mimir translated as conditions rather than restrictions. "It says we may take what serves creation's purpose," the severed head interpreted, "but requests that we preserve rather than consume, share rather than hoard, and implement with respect for original intentions rather than adapting solely for personal advantage." Kratos considered these conditions with characteristic thoroughness, finding them aligned with principles the blue knowledge stone had conveyed: responsibility accompanying capability, purpose guiding application, respect for materials extending to respect for knowledge itself. Acceptable terms, he concluded, his tone suggesting genuine agreement rather than mere compliance. With permission established, they carefully selected materials from the repository that would best serve Brock's specific interests, while respecting the preservation of the collection as a whole. Atreus, with his developing literacy in various scripts and diagrams, proved particularly valuable in identifying the most relevant documents, while Kratos assessed physical samples and models with his practical understanding of materials and functional requirements. As they conducted this selective gathering, the dwarf form moved among the room's 7 niches, its luminous presence touching each knowledge stone briefly before returning to the chamber's center. This circuit complete, It extended both hands outward in gesture that somehow conveyed farewell, gratitude, and expectation simultaneously, acknowledging their departure while suggesting potential return under appropriate circumstances. "I believe we're being offered ongoing access," Mimir observed with barely contained excitement. "Not unlimited or unrestricted, but genuine invitation to return when our understanding has developed sufficiently to benefit from deeper levels of knowledge. Quite extraordinary, considering dwarven traditional secrecy." The dwarf form confirmed this interpretation with nods that somehow conveyed specific approval of Mimir's presence, perhaps recognizing kindred scholarly spirit despite the head's obvious non-dwarven origin. This acknowledgement was followed by final gesture toward Atreus specifically, accompanied by subtle shifts in the songstone's acoustic pattern that suggested personal message rather than general communication. "It's speaking to me," the boy said softly, his expression showing concentration as he interpreted impressions forming directly in his awareness. "Saying that I have maker's hands, that I should remember creation balances destruction, that building matters as much as fighting." He looked up at his father with mixture of wonder and uncertainty. "How does it know what we've been doing?" "Perception beyond conventional senses," Kratos suggested, his pragmatic assessment recognizing capabilities outside normal parameters without assigning mystical significance where practical explanation might suffice. "Reading essence rather than appearance." "Precisely," Mimir agreed. These thought-form manifestations were developed specifically to identify potential rather than merely assess current ability. Ivaldi would have ensured his preserved consciousness could recognize those with capacity for both martial skill and creative implementation, balancing warrior and artisan aspects rather than emphasizing either exclusively. This explanation satisfied Atreus, who bowed slightly toward the luminous figure in gesture of respect that somehow felt more appropriate than verbal thanks. The dwarf form returned the gesture with dignified inclination of its radiant head, then gradually began diminishing in intensity, not vanishing abruptly but receding like tide returning to ocean, leaving impression that it remained present, though no longer visible to conventional perception. As the manifestation faded, the songstone's emissions adjusted once more, light becoming more diffuse, while acoustic patterns simplified into gentle guidance that would lead them back through the complex, rather than holding them in the central chamber. The knowledge stones returned to their respective pedestals, their inner illumination subsiding to subtle glow rather than extinguishing completely, while the repository doorway remained open, suggesting they might take additional time with selections if desired before departing. "I think we have what we came for," Atreus said after completing final check of their gathered materials, carefully secured in protective wrappings improvised from their travel gear. "Brock will be amazed. These techniques haven't been used for centuries, according to what the green stone showed me." Kratos nodded agreement, his own assessment confirming they had obtained significant value while respecting the repository's integrity and fundamental purpose. With typical efficiency, he organized their acquisitions for optimal transport, distributing weight according to respective carrying capacities, while ensuring fragile materials received appropriate protection. As they prepared to follow the Songstone's guidance back toward the Forge complex entrance, Atreus paused for one final look at the Thought Sphere, its minimalist perfection somehow more impressive after experiencing its hidden capabilities and contents. "Will we come back?" he asked, the question directed to his father but perhaps also to himself. Kratos considered this with characteristic thoroughness, weighing practical considerations against less tangible factors. "If purpose requires," he answered finally, "not dismissal, but pragmatic assessment, that recognized value without making commitments beyond current certainty. This measured response satisfied Atreus, who had grown accustomed to his father's careful approach to future possibilities. Together they departed the central chamber, following the Songstone's gentle guidance back through contemplation spaces, specialized workshops, and main forge areas they had traversed earlier. Throughout this return journey, the stone's emissions maintained consistent support without demanding specific pace or attention, accompanying rather than directing, suggesting rather than commanding. As they neared the forge complex entrance through which they had initially arrived, the Songstone's guidance led them briefly toward the small rest space where they had first encountered it. Upon reaching this area, the suspended crystal's emissions organized themselves into what clearly represented farewell, not permanent separation, but respectful acknowledgement of current departure, with possibility of future return. It's been interesting having a guide that's not like me, Mimir observed as they prepared to leave the Songstone behind. Something ancient yet still present, preserving knowledge without imposing perspective. Quite refreshing compared to the usual bombastic personalities one encounters in magical contexts. The crystal pulsed briefly at these words, its acoustic pattern suggesting something between amusement and agreement, before settling into quieter emissions that would likely continue long after they departed, maintaining its patient vigil until other worthy visitors might someday arrive, seeking knowledge preserved through centuries of darkness and abandonment. Their return to the surface passages proceeded efficiently, father and son moving with confidence born of familiarity with route previously traveled. The materials gathered from Evoldi's repository, though not physically substantial, carried weight beyond their material properties, representing responsibility as much as acquisition, obligation as much as opportunity. Both Kratos and Atreus seemed to feel this significance, treating their burden with care that acknowledged its value beyond practical application. As they emerged finally from Svartalheim's depths into the realm's perpetual twilight, they paused briefly to adjust to the transition, not just from underground to surface, but from ancient preservation to current reality, from timeless knowledge to immediate application. The constant industrial haze characteristic of the realm cast everything in muted copper tones, a stark contrast to the clear acoustic space and precise illumination they had experienced within Evaldi's protected domain. "I find myself wondering," Mimir commented as they oriented themselves for the journey toward Brock's workshop, "how many other such repositories might exist throughout the 9 realms. Knowledge preserved by masters who recognized coming darkness and prepared accordingly. Odin's obsession with controlling information likely drove many to similar precautions." This observation resonated with both Kratos and Atreus, who had encountered numerous examples of knowledge deliberately hidden from divine interference or appropriation. Their own journey had repeatedly revealed tensions between preservation and accessibility, between protecting wisdom from misuse and ensuring its continuation through troubled times. "Father," Atreus said after they had traveled some distance in comfortable silence, "what the dwarf form said about me having maker's hands, do you think that's true? That I could create things, not just fight?" Kratos considered this with characteristic thoroughness, studying his son's expression with assessment that combined tactical analysis with parental attention. "Your mother created," he answered finally, "both objects and opportunities. The capacity lives in you." After a brief pause, he added, "The choice of implementation remains yours." This response, acknowledging potential while respecting autonomy, seemed to satisfy Atreus, who nodded thoughtfully before returning his attention to their path across Svartalheim's broken landscape. The materials from Ivaldi's repository, secured carefully in his pack, felt differently significant now. Not just valuable acquisitions, but potential inspiration. Examples of what creation guided by clear purpose might achieve. As they continued their journey toward reuniting with Brock, the lessons of the ancient forge complex seemed to travel with them, not just in physical materials or transferred knowledge, but in subtle shifts of perspective regarding creation's relationship to destruction. Making's balance with unmaking, building's complement to breaking. These philosophical considerations, emerging naturally from practical experience rather than abstract instruction, represented perhaps the most significant treasure recovered from the forgotten depths, where Ivaldi's wisdom had waited patiently through centuries of darkness. In the perpetual twilight of Svartalheim, father and son walked steady and unhurried toward their immediate destination, carrying knowledge from the past while contemplating applications that might shape the future. Their shared journey continuing beyond simple progression through space into development of understanding that honored legacy while embracing possibility. Behind them, deep within the mountain, the Songstone's gentle resonance continued, maintaining its ancient vigil until worthy seekers might once again descend in search of wisdom, preserved through ages of conflict and change. The terrain of Svartalheim presented its own challenges, paths that wound between massive industrial structures abandoned centuries ago, narrow bridges spanning chasms where molten metal had once flowed in rivers of liquid fire, occasional unstable areas where mining operations had weakened underlying support. Kratos navigated these obstacles with practiced efficiency, occasionally extending a steadying hand when particularly treacherous sections required crossing. "Do you think Brock already knows about Ivaldi's forge?" Atreus asked as they carefully traversed a narrow ledge overlooking what appeared to be a massive cooling basin, now empty but still impressive in scale. He seemed to know something important was there, but not exactly what. "The dwarf protects his knowledge as others protect gold," Kratos answered, his tone suggesting neither criticism nor approval, but simple observation. "He reveals only what serves immediate purpose." "Indeed," Mimir added, "the dwarven brothers maintain complex relationship with their ancestral legacies. Pride in craftsmanship traditions balanced against personal ambitions and competitive instincts. Brock likely suspected Ivaldi's repository existed, but lacked specific information about accessing it, hence sending you two as capable proxies rather than attempting direct exploration himself." This assessment aligned with their previous experiences with the Blue Dwarf, whose gruff exterior and apparent self-interest often concealed deeper motivations and surprising sentimentality regarding his craft's heritage. Though Brock rarely expressed direct appreciation, his actions frequently revealed respect for tradition that transcended mere practical application or material gain. As they continued their journey across Svartalheim's broken landscape, occasional distant sounds reached them. Rhythmic hammering from active forges, grinding machinery from mining operations, the hiss of superheated metal meeting cooling agents. These industrial symphonies carried none of the harmonic sophistication of the Songstone's emissions, yet possessed their own form of beauty. Straightforward purpose expressed through unadorned function, practical creation manifested through direct application of skill and effort. "I never really listened to the forges before," Atreus observed, his awareness heightened by recent experiences with more deliberate acoustic patterns. "There's something honest about the sounds. Nothing hidden or fancy, just work happening exactly as it needs to." Kratos nodded, recognizing in his son's observation an appreciation for directness that complemented rather than rejected more sophisticated approaches. "Many paths to creation," he said, none inherently superior if purpose remains clear. This philosophical perspective, acknowledging diverse methodologies without hierarchical judgment, represented another subtle shift from Kratos' historically absolute assessments of efficiency and effectiveness. The experiences within Ivaldi's domain had reinforced perspectives already developing through his journey with Atreus, that wisdom often recognized multiple valid approaches rather than insisting on singular correctness. Their path eventually brought them within sight of Brock's current workshop, a structure that combined practical functionality with the dwarf's characteristic aesthetic preferences. Smoke rising from multiple chimneys in precisely controlled plumes that suggested specific metallurgical processes underway within. As they approached, rhythmic hammering emerged from the open doorway, accompanied by occasional colorful cursing that confirmed the blue dwarf was indeed present and actively engaged in his craft. "Remember," Mimir advised as they prepared to enter, "dwarven etiquette regarding discovered knowledge can be rather complex. Best to present your findings as respectful recovery rather than personal discovery, acknowledging Ivaldi's mastery rather than emphasizing your own achievements in locating his repository." This guidance proved valuable as they crossed the workshop's threshold, finding Brock hunched over his anvil, hammer striking in practiced rhythm against what appeared to be a particularly challenging piece of armor plating. The dwarf did not immediately acknowledge their arrival, completing his current sequence of strikes before quenching the metal in nearby cooling basin with characteristic lack of ceremony. "About time you two showed up," he grumbled without looking directly at them, though his tone lacked genuine annoyance. "Was beginning to think you'd gotten lost in the lower tunnels like those idiots from Odin's exploration teams. Useless lot. Couldn't find their own asses with both hands and a map." This greeting, seemingly dismissive yet clearly relieved, represented Brock's typical communication style: concern masked by complaint, welcome concealed within criticism. Atreus, long accustomed to the dwarf's conversational patterns, smiled slightly as he carefully removed their findings from his pack. "We found Ivaldi's repositories," he said simply, recognizing that excessive elaboration would diminish rather than enhance the discovery's significance in Brock's estimation. "Both knowledge stones and physical documentation of techniques that might interest you." The dwarf's head snapped up at this, his usually narrowed eyes widening momentarily before recovering their customary suspicious squint. "Ivaldi's actual records? Not just rumors or second-hand approximations?" He approached cautiously, as if expecting disappointment despite Atreus' straightforward statement. "Let's see what you've actually got before getting all excited about it." With appropriate respect for both materials and Brock's expertise, Atreus carefully unwrapped the selected documents and samples they had brought from the hidden repository. He arranged them on a relatively clear workbench, making no claims about their significance, but simply presenting them for the dwarf's professional assessment. Brock approached with performance of reluctant interest that failed to conceal his genuine excitement, hands moving with surprising gentleness as he examined the ancient scrolls and material samples. His breathing changed as he recognized specific diagrams and notations, becoming slower, more controlled, as if subconsciously matching his physiological responses to the concentration required for proper appreciation of what lay before him. "Well, I'll be damned to Helheim and back," he muttered finally, the closest thing to reverent tone either Kratos or Atreus had ever heard from the typically profane craftsman. This is genuine Ivaldi methodology. His personal notation system, his material specification abbreviations. Nobody's seen this level of documentation since before the Aesir Vanir conflicts. He looked up at them with uncharacteristic directness. "Where exactly did you find these?" Kratos and Atreus exchanged brief glance, silent communication establishing boundaries for their response. Without revealing specific pathways or security mechanisms, they provided general description of the forge complex and central repository, emphasizing Ivaldi's apparent intention that worthy craftsmen might eventually rediscover his preserved knowledge, rather than claiming special significance in their own role as temporary messengers. This approach seemed to satisfy Brock, who nodded occasionally throughout their account while continuing to examine the materials with meticulous attention to detail. When they mentioned the luminous dwarf form and its apparent assessment of their worthiness, his expression shifted briefly to something approaching wistful, quickly suppressed but noticed by both father and son nonetheless. "That'd be Ivaldi's thought impression all right," he confirmed gruffly. "Stubborn old bastard refused to just die properly like normal folk. Had to find ways to stick around and keep judging everybody's work from beyond the grave." Despite the seemingly critical words, unmistakable respect colored Brock's tone. Admiration for commitment that transcended mortality's usual limitations. As the dwarf continued examining their recovered materials, occasionally muttering appreciative obscenities at particularly impressive technical specifications, Kratos and Atreus allowed themselves brief respite from the day's exertions. The workshop, though chaotic by conventional standards, offered comfortable familiarity after their journey through ancient spaces. The scent of active forge fires and recently worked metal, the organized clutter of tools and materials in constant use, the functional arrangement that prioritized efficiency over aesthetics without rejecting craftsmanship's inherent beauty. "This," Roch said finally, holding up a specific diagram with unusual care, "is exactly what I've been trying to figure out for decades. Temperature staging for combining materials that naturally repel each other, creating alloys that shouldn't technically be possible according to standard metallurgical principles." He studied the ancient notation with evident appreciation. Crafty old codger worked out thermal sequencing patterns that bypass normal limitations. Brilliant, really. Atreus, genuinely interested in the technical aspects despite limited formal training, moved closer to observe the diagram in question. "The green knowledge stone showed me something about that," he offered cautiously, aware of Brock's occasional sensitivity regarding amateur observations of professional matters. About how certain materials have rhythms, patterns of resistance and acceptance that can be worked with rather than against. The dwarf looked up sharply, surprise briefly overtaking his customary scowl. "You actually understood that concept from just a knowledge stone transfer, without prior metallurgical training?" He studied the boy with reassessment, professional interest temporarily overriding habitual gruffness. "Ah, maybe there's more of your mother in you than just the color of your eyes." This reference to Faye, rare from anyone outside their immediate family circle, carried significance beyond casual observation. Brock had respected Atreus' mother as fellow craftsperson, despite their different specializations, recognizing in her work the same commitment to purpose beyond functionality that characterized the finest dwarven creations. To suggest her son might share such capacity represented genuine compliment rather than automatic association. "The repositories remain accessible," Kratos stated, providing information relevant to Brock's obvious interest without unnecessary elaboration. "Protected but not sealed. Available to those deemed appropriate by whatever criteria Ivaldi established." The dwarf absorbed this with thoughtful nod, implications clearly extending beyond immediate application to longer-term considerations regarding preservation and potential recovery of additional materials. "Good to know," he said finally. simple acknowledgement containing layers of potential future action. Might have more specific questions once I've had time to study these properly. With business aspects addressed, conversation shifted toward practical considerations of immediate return value for the expedition. Though Brock maintained his characteristic performance of begrudging fairness, the compensation he offered for their efforts proved notably generous. Combination of material goods, enhanced equipment modifications, and promised future craft priority that acknowledged the discovery's significance beyond conventional mercantile exchange. As evening approached, bringing subtle darkening to Svartalheim's perpetual twilight, arrangements were made for overnight accommodation within the workshop's adjacent living quarters. While Brock continued examining the recovered materials with professional concentration that bordered on obsession, Kratos and Atreus established themselves in the cramped but functional space provided for occasional visitors or exhausted apprentices. "He's really happy, isn't he?" Atreus observed quietly as they arranged their limited gear in the small chamber. "I mean, I know he doesn't show it like normal people would, but I can tell this means a lot to him." Kratos nodded, understanding his son's reference to the dwarf's controlled yet evident enthusiasm regarding their discoveries. "Craftsmen value knowledge beyond tools," he observed. "Techniques represent legacy that transcends individual creations." This assessment aligned with impressions both had received from the knowledge stones in Ivaldi's manifestation, that making extended beyond physical objects into philosophical lineage, connecting practitioners across generations through shared understanding, rather than merely through artifacts that survived their creators. Brock, for all his pragmatic focus on tangible results, clearly recognized this deeper significance in the recovered methodologies. As they settled into simple but adequate sleeping arrangements, the sounds of the workshop continued. Brock apparently intent on immediate implementation of certain recovered techniques, rather than postponing experimentation until after proper rest. The rhythmic hammering, grinding of whetstones, and occasional hiss of hot metal meeting cooling agents created industrial lullaby that both father and son found oddly comforting after their day's journey through ancient silence, punctuated by ghostly acoustic phenomena. "Father," Atreus said softly as darkness deepened around them, his voice thoughtful rather than troubled, "do you think we'll make anything? I mean, not just find things or fix things or use things others have made, but actually create something new? Something that might last, like Ivaldi's work has lasted?" Kratos considered this question with characteristic thoroughness, recognizing its significance beyond casual evening conversation. His son sought not just prediction but perspective, wondering about potential contributions beyond immediate survival or conflict resolution that had dominated their journey thus far. "Creation requires stability," he answered finally, his deep voice pitched low in acknowledgement of the intimate setting. "Security before innovation, but yes, you will make things that endure, perhaps different from Ivaldi's works but no less significant." This response, acknowledging current limitations while affirming future possibilities, seemed to satisfy Atreus, who nodded thoughtfully before settling deeper into his borrowed bedding. The question and its answer represented another subtle marker in their evolving relationship, moving beyond immediate tactical concerns toward longer-term considerations of legacy and purpose that transcended their current challenges. As sleep approached, bringing temporary respite from conscious thought, both father and son carried impressions from their journey that extended beyond specific discoveries or practical acquisitions. The echoes of ancient creation, the resonance of preserved purpose, the continuity of craft traditions across centuries of conflict and change. These elements had touched something fundamental in their understanding of persistence through difficulty, of meaning sustained despite circumstance. In Svartalheim's shadowed depths, they had encountered not ghosts, but echoes, reverberations of intention that transcended mortality without defying natural completion, preservation that honored cycles rather than attempting their circumvention. These philosophical impressions, emerging naturally from practical experience rather than abstract instruction, represented perhaps the most significant treasure recovered from forgotten forges where Ivaldi's wisdom had waited patiently through ages of darkness. As consciousness faded toward dreams, the ambient sounds of Brock's continuing work provided counterpoint to memories of the Songstone's harmonious guidance. Different expressions of similar dedication, diverse approaches to common purpose, varied paths toward enduring creation. In this confluence of ancient legacy and current application, past mastery and future possibility, father and son found temporary peace amidst their ongoing journey. Their rest deepened by recognition of continuity that transcended immediate challenges, while acknowledging their reality. The echoes of Svartalheim's ancient forges would continue resonating long after their departure, within recovered techniques implemented through Brock's skilled hands, within philosophical perspectives integrated into their evolving understanding, within potential futures where creation might balance destruction in their continuing journey across 9 realms, still struggling toward equilibrium after ages of conflict and upheaval. In these subtle reverberations lay possibilities beyond current circumstance, echoes becoming foundations for harmonies yet uncomposed, remembered wisdom inspiring creations yet unmade. As the echoes of Svartalheim's ancient forges continue to resonate in their memories, Kratos and Atreus' journey takes them further into the mysteries of the Dwarven realms. The knowledge they gain from Ivaldi's repository becomes not just a treasure from the past, but a key that will soon unlock another hidden wonder, one that lies beyond the familiar paths and deeper into the secretive world of Dwarven craft and magic. The whispers of an even more ancient and secretive location have reached their ears. A place known in hushed tones among the most skilled Dwarven craftsmen as the Enclave of Hidden Fires. It is said that within this carefully concealed sanctuary, flames burn that were kindled before the reign of Odin himself, tended by artisans who guard traditions older than the current configuration of the 9 realms. As night falls across Svartalheim, and Brock continues his work with the recovered techniques, neither Kratos nor Atreus can know that their path will soon lead them to this legendary enclave, where secrets of fire and metal await that will challenge their understanding of creation itself. The journey into Svartalheim began at dawn, though beneath the mountain's heavy shadow it was difficult to discern the sun's position in the sky. Kratos and Atreus stood at the mouth of a narrow cave, its entrance partially concealed by a waterfall that cascaded over dark stones slick with moss. Steam rose where the water met the warmer air, emerging from deep within the mountain, creating a perpetual mist that shrouded their approach from prying eyes. "Are you certain this is the correct path?" Kratos asked, his deep voice barely audible over the rushing water. His eyes narrowed as he assessed the treacherous footing at the cave's entrance. Atreus nodded, consulting the map that Brock had grudgingly provided after much persuasion. "According to this, there's a network of tunnels beyond this entrance that should lead us to the older sections of Svartalheim, away from the mines that the gods control. Places even the Aesir have forgotten," added Mimir from his position at Kratos' belt. "The dwarves were delving into these mountains long before Odin claimed dominion over the realms. Their oldest settlements lie deep and hidden, protected by more than mere stone and distance. Kratos grunted in acknowledgement, adjusting the axe on his back before stepping cautiously through the curtain of water. The spray dampened his beard and shoulders as he passed, the coolness a brief respite against the unexpected warmth emanating from the cave. Atreus followed closely, his smaller frame slipping easily through the narrow opening that his father had needed to turn sideways to navigate. Inside, the passageway widened gradually, the sound of the waterfall fading to a distant murmur as they proceeded. The walls transitioned from natural stone to something more deliberate, not fully carved, but shaped, as if the mountain itself had been persuaded rather than forced to yield this space to its inhabitants. Occasional markers appeared along the walls, runes etched into the stone that glowed faintly with a bluish light when Atreus ran his fingers across them. "Navigation markers," the boy translated, his knowledge of languages expanding steadily since their journey began. "They indicate direction and distance to something called the Heart Forge. I think that's where we need to go." "The Heart Forge," Mimir mused, his voice taking on the thoughtful tone that usually preceded one of his historical digressions. "Now, there's a name I haven't heard in centuries." It was said to be the original forge where the dwarven brothers Brolker and Sindri learned their craft, before the great schism that divided their people. The path descended steadily, occasionally branching into smaller tunnels that disappeared into darkness. Atreus consistently chose the path that bore the bluish runes, leading them ever deeper into the mountain's embrace. As they progressed, the air grew noticeably warmer, carrying hints of smoke and metal, the distinct scent of active forges. "Father, look," Atreus whispered after nearly an hour of silent walking. He pointed to where the tunnel ahead widened into a larger chamber, a soft amber glow spilling into the passageway. They approached cautiously, Kratos instinctively placing a hand on his son's shoulder to slow his eager advance. The chamber before them opened into a vast cavern that stretched beyond the reach of their vision, its ceiling lost in shadows despite the numerous sources of light below. Suspended platforms connected by narrow bridges formed a complex three-dimensional settlement built into the cavern walls, each level hosting various structures that appeared to be workshops and dwellings. Most striking, however, were the forges. Unlike the practical, functional setup that Brock and Sindri employed in their shops, these were works of art in themselves. Intricate constructions of metal and stone that channeled fire and heat with mesmerizing precision. Each forge was surrounded by a team of dwarves working in perfect, silent coordination, their movements almost ritualistic in their harmony. "Magnificent," Mimir breathed. "I'd heard tales, of course, but to see it with my own eyes, or eye, rather." Kratos surveyed the scene with tactical assessment, noting potential paths forward and possible risks. The dwarves appeared focused entirely on their work, showing no indication that they had noticed the newcomers at the chamber's entrance. "They seem unaware of our presence," he observed quietly. "Not unaware," Mimir corrected. "Unperturbed. Dwarven craftsmen of this caliber enter a state of focused concentration that borders on trance. They likely sensed our approach the moment we passed through the waterfall, but deemed us non-threatening. A benefit of arriving with no weapons drawn, I imagine." Atreus stepped forward slowly, drawn by the intricate work taking place at the nearest forge. A dwarf with a silver-streaked beard was shaping what appeared to be a delicate chain of impossibly small links, each one glowing momentarily as it was joined to the next. The craftsman never looked up, but his hands paused briefly in their work as Atreus approached, acknowledging the boy's presence without breaking concentration. "It's beautiful," Atreus said softly, receiving a slight nod from the dwarf, before the rhythmic work resumed. We should proceed with caution, Kratos advised, uncomfortable with the open exposure of their current position. Though he detected no immediate threat, years of experience had taught him that peaceful situations could transform rapidly, especially in unfamiliar territory. They made their way along a narrow path that wound between the platforms, heading toward a larger structure at the far end of the cavern. Unlike the other workshops, this building seemed older, its architecture more primal, as if it had grown organically from the living stone rather than being constructed upon it. A soft, pulsing light emanated from within, not the orange-red of forge fires, but something bluer, cooler, yet somehow containing deep. The Heart Forge, Mimir identified as they drew closer. If Brock's information is correct, that's where we'll find answers about the artifact Faye mentioned in her notes. The reference to Atreus' mother brought a thoughtful expression to the boy's face. Since discovering additional pages from her journal several days prior, they had been following a trail of cryptic references that had ultimately led them to seek out this hidden enclave. The journal had mentioned a dwarven creation of singular importance. Not a weapon, but something Faye had described as a bridge between what is and what might be. As they approached the Heart Forge, the ambient sounds of the enclave seemed to shift, the rhythmic hammering taking on a more deliberate pattern that Atreus could almost interpret as language. The blue-white light pulsating from within the structure intensified slightly, as if responding to their proximity. "It knows we're here," Atreus whispered, earning a questioning glance from his father. "The forge," the boy clarified. "It's aware, somehow." Before Kratos could respond, a figure emerged from the entrance of the Heart Forge. Unlike the other dwarves they had passed, this one wore ceremonial garments, a robe of deep indigo embroidered with silver patterns that matched the runes they had followed through the tunnels. His beard was braided elaborately, woven with small metal tokens that clinked softly as he moved. "The mountain grants you passage," the dwarf said, his voice surprisingly gentle for one of his kind, "and the forge accepts your presence. You seek the Svartalheim heart, as the giantess foretold." Kratos tensed slightly at this reference to Faye, but Atreus stepped forward, producing the journal page that had led them here. "My mother wrote about an artifact that could bridge between what is and what might be. Is that the heart?" The dwarf studied Atreus for a long moment before nodding slowly. "The heart sees potential where others see only the present. It was crafted in an age when the boundaries between possibility and reality were less rigid." He gestured toward the entrance behind him. "If you would understand, you must observe. Words alone cannot convey its nature." Kratos hesitated, his instinctive caution warring with the necessity of their quest. The dwarf seemed to sense his reservation and offered what might have been a smile beneath his thick beard. "The heart harbors no threat to those who approach with respect rather than desire for dominion," he assured them. "It is a tool of vision, not of power as the Aesir understand it." With a measured nod, Kratos followed as the dwarf led them into the Heart Forge. The interior was surprisingly austere compared to the ornate workstations they had passed. A single circular platform occupied the center of the space, surrounded by a ring of what appeared to be mirrors, though their surfaces rippled like water disturbed by gentle breezes. Above, the cavern ceiling opened into a natural chimney that stretched upward beyond sight, while below the platform, visible through a transparent floor section, churned what appeared to be the molten heart of the mountain itself. "The heart draws upon 3 elements," their guide explained, gesturing first to the fiery depths below, then to the mirrors, and finally to the chimney above. "The mountain's core provides stability and endurance. The reflective surfaces capture possibility, what might be or might have been. The chimney connects to the sky above, allowing the influence of cosmos and time. At the center of the platform rested a simple pedestal upon which sat an object that defied easy description. It appeared metallic, roughly the size of Atreus's two hands cupped together, and seemed to shift between states, sometimes resembling a perfect sphere, at other moments taking on faceted dimensions, occasionally seeming to flow like mercury before resolving back into solidity. The Svartalheim heart, the dwarf said reverently, crafted when the first dwarves delved into these mountains. Before gods walked the 9 realms, it shows not what is, but what might become if certain paths are followed. Kratos approached slowly, his natural curiosity evident in his expression. How does it work, he asked, stopping just short of the pedestal. Intent guides its revelations, came the reply. Focus your thoughts upon a question, a potential path, and the heart responds with vision. Not prophecy, the future remains unmade, but possibility given form. Kratos watched with careful attention as his son circled the pedestal, studying the shifting object from different angles. The boy's growing connection to his giant heritage had manifested in increasing sensitivity to magical artifacts, a development that both concerned and reassured his father. Understanding such things provided advantage in their journey, yet also risked drawing unwanted attention from forces that monitored such abilities. Can anyone use it? Atreus asked, glancing back at Kratos as if seeking permission to try. The dwarf considered this question with more seriousness than Kratos had anticipated. The heart responds most clearly to those with blood connections to its creators. Dwarves primarily, but also giants, who contributed wisdom to its making. Others may witness its revelations, but interpretation becomes challenging. My mother was a giant, Atreus said softly, and she wanted us to find this. Indeed, the dwarf acknowledged. Faye of the Jotnar visited this place twice within my memory, first in her youth, seeking understanding of paths yet untaken, later, after meeting your father, seeking confirmation of choices made. This revelation brought Kratos' full attention to their guide. You knew her, he stated rather than asked, his deep voice carrying the complex emotions that references to Faye always evoked. Grief, mingled with respect, and lingering questions about her hidden knowledge. I witnessed her consultations with the heart, the dwarf clarified. She came alone the first time. The second, she carried you within her, he added, nodding to Atreus. Her questions then concerned what awaited beyond her own sight, the legacy she would leave in a child of mixed divine heritage. The forge chamber fell silent, save for the subtle sounds of the heart itself, a soft hum at the edge of audibility, occasionally punctuated by what might have been distant chimes. Atreus looked to his father, a question in his eyes that needed no voicing. Should they proceed? After a moment's consideration, Kratos gave a measured nod. Whatever Faye had intended by leading them here, through her notes, it concerned their journey forward, and the boy's developing understanding of his nature and potential. Though he remained wary of prophecy and its tendency to become self-fulfilling, he respected his late wife's wisdom too deeply to dismiss her guidance. What must he do? Kratos asked their guide, who had been patiently observing their silent communication. Simply approach with open mind and focused question, the dwarf explained. The heart responds to intention rather than words spoken. Touch is not required, though some find physical connection enhances clarity. Atreus took a deep breath and stepped closer to the pedestal. Should I ask about our journey? About what Mother wanted us to know? The heart reveals possibilities, boy, not certainties, Mimir cautioned from his position at Kratos's belt. Frame your inquiry around paths rather than destinations. Nodding in understanding, Atreus closed his eyes briefly, composing his thoughts. When he opened them again, he focused intently on the shifting object before him. Show me the path my mother saw for us, he requested softly, the journey she prepared us for. For several heartbeats, nothing seemed to change. Then, gradually, the heart's transformation slowed, its surface taking on a smoother, more reflective quality. Colors began to swirl within its depths, not the fiery oranges and reds of the forges surrounding them, but cooler tones, deep blues, forest greens, and occasional flashes of silver white, like distant stars. As Atreus maintained his focus, these colors began to extend beyond the heart itself, flowing outward like mist to form shapes in the air between the pedestal and the surrounding mirrors. The images were indistinct at first, suggestions of landscapes, fleeting impressions of figures in motion, symbols that appeared and dissolved too quickly to interpret. It gathers your intention, their guide explained quietly, connecting your heritage, your experiences, your potential futures. The clearer your question, the more focused its response. Atreus nodded without shifting his gaze from the unfolding vision. The path forward, he clarified, his voice steady despite the extraordinary phenomenon before him. Show me how to fulfill the journey my mother set before us. The swirling colors responded immediately, coalescing into more distinct forms. The surrounding mirrors activated as well, their rippling surfaces now reflecting not the chamber around them, but different scenes entirely. Variations on the central vision forming above the heart, as if showing alternate perspectives or possible variations. Kratos moved closer, his initial wariness partially yielding to necessity. If this artifact was showing pathways relevant to their journey, he needed to witness and understand, not to pursue prophecy, but to make informed choices about the challenges ahead. What materialized before them was a sequence of images that flowed into one another like scenes from a dream. They saw mountains they had not yet climbed, forests unlike those of Midgard, and shorelines where unfamiliar seas crashed against towering cliffs. Interspersed among these landscapes were glimpses of beings, some clearly identifiable as gods or monsters from the pantheons they had encountered, others more mysterious, their forms suggesting power and antiquity beyond easy categorization. Throughout the vision, two figures appeared repeatedly, unmistakably Kratos and Atreus, though sometimes altered by time or circumstance. In some scenes, Atreus appeared older, his boyish features maturing toward manhood. In others, Kratos bore unfamiliar scars or carried weapons they had not yet encountered. The constants remained, their presence together and a sense of purpose that guided their steps through these varied landscapes. "I see us," Atreus whispered, his voice filled with wonder rather than fear, despite the strangeness of observing potential versions of himself. "We're traveling beyond the realms we know. The heart shows possibility, not certainty," their guide reminded them. "What you witness may come to pass, or may represent one branch among many in the growth of your fate." As the vision continued to unfold, certain images appeared with greater frequency and clarity than others. A mountain peak crowned with unusual structures that resembled neither Norse nor Greek architecture. A circular chamber where 9 rivers of light converged at a central point. A tree that might have been Yggdrasil, but viewed from an unfamiliar perspective that suggested either different location or different time. And throughout, recurring like a visual motif, a symbol, a a spiral pattern that began with Jotun runes at its center and expanded outward through transformations that incorporated other magical languages before concluding in a form none of them recognized. Perhaps something yet to be created. The convergence pattern the dwarf identified when this symbol appeared particularly clearly. Ancient knowledge, believed lost when the realms were separated. It appears your path involves its rediscovery. Kratos studied these images with guarded attention, automatically assessing tactical implications rather than mystical significance. The environments they were shown would present different challenges than those they had faced thus far, requiring adaptation of their combat strategies and survival techniques. The unfamiliar beings might represent new allies or enemies, necessitating careful judgment rather than reflexive response. Most significantly, the recurring appearances of Atreus at different ages suggested a journey extending far beyond their current quest, a longer path than Kratos had initially anticipated when they set out to fulfill Faye's final wishes. The boy was growing not just in size but in capability, his developing powers evident in how these possible future versions of himself interacted with the world around them. The dwarf observed Kratos' assessment with knowing eyes. "You see the warrior's path through these visions," he noted. "Challenges to overcome, terrain to navigate, potential confrontations to prepare for." The giantess saw similarly when she consulted the heart, practical implications beyond mystical significance. Before Kratos could respond, the vision underwent a subtle shift. The landscapes and figures receded somewhat, while the spiral symbol expanded, rotating slowly as its details became more prominent. As it turned, each segment illuminated in sequence, revealing connections previously obscured. "The pattern grows clearer," their guide observed. "The heart responds to your combined presence. Father and son, god and giant, present and future." Faye anticipated this resonance. Atreus reached out tentatively toward the floating spiral, not quite touching it but tracing its pattern in the air. "It feels familiar," he said softly, "like something I've seen in dreams or remembered from before I was born." As his fingers followed the curves of the symbol, the vision responded, the spiral expanding further until it seemed to encompass the entire chamber. The surrounding mirrors now reflected not variations but amplifications, each showing the same pattern from different perspectives that somehow combined to suggest three-dimensional complexity beyond what their eyes could directly perceive. "The convergence pattern exists simultaneously in multiple realms," the dwarf explained, his tone suggesting even he found this remarkable. "What appears as symbol in one dimension manifests as physical structure in another, as incantation in a third. Fragmentary knowledge exists in each realm, but complete understanding requires perspective from all." Suddenly, the vision pulsed with increased intensity, the spiral pattern emitting a brief flash of light before contracting rapidly back into the heart. The colors swirled once more before settling, the artifact returning to its previous state of subtle transformation between forms. Atreus blinked, as if awakening from deep concentration. "It ended," he said, a hint of disappointment in his voice. "It showed what was needed," their guide corrected gently. "The heart does not indulge curiosity beyond purpose." Kratos placed a hand on his son's shoulder, steadying the boy who swayed slightly from the intensity of the experience. "What does this convergence pattern signify?" he asked the dwarf directly, seeking practical understanding rather than mystical explanation. "Balance," came the immediate reply. "The original equilibrium between realms before gods imposed separation and hierarchy." The pattern contains knowledge of how the worlds once flowed into one another naturally, without the artificial barriers Odin and his kind established to control movement and maintain power. This explanation resonated with what they had learned thus far about Odin's manipulation of the realms and the restricted pathways between them. The All-Father's obsession with controlling access to different worlds, particularly Jotunheim, had shaped much of the conflict that defined the current age. And Faye wished us to find this knowledge, Kratos stated, connecting this revelation to their overall journey. The dwarf nodded solemnly. The giantess understood that the artificial separation of realms creates instability that grows with time. What Odin perceives as protection against Ragnarok may instead be hastening its arrival through accumulated distortion of natural patterns. Mother's journal mentioned mending what has been sundered. Atreus recalled the phrase taking on new significance in light of what they had witnessed. I thought she meant healing the rift between gods and giants, but perhaps she meant something more literal, the connections between realms. Both interpretations likely hold truth, Mimir contributed. Faye was remarkably adept at crafting messages with multiple valid meanings, depending on one's perspective and the timing of their receipt. The Heart Forge had grown quieter during their conversation, the rhythmic sounds from the surrounding enclave diminishing as if in deference to the significance of what had transpired. Their dwarf guide observed them with patient attention, allowing them space to process the revelations they had received. After several moments of contemplative silence, Kratos addressed their guide with direct pragmatism. This convergence pattern, how do we locate its physical manifestation? The heart has shown you their forms, the dwarf replied. Your eyes will now recognize what previously would have passed unnoticed. The pattern exists throughout the realms, disguised as natural formations, incorporated into ancient structures, embedded in artifacts crafted before the separation. Like a language we've now learned to read, Atreus suggested, earning an approving nod from their guide. Precisely. The first appearance may already lie within your recent memory, unrecognized until this moment. Reflect upon places of unusual power or unexpected transition you have encountered in your journey thus far. Atron's brow furrowed in concentration as he mentally revisited significant locations from their travels. The mountain peak where we scattered Mother's ashes, he suggested after a moment. The view from there, the way the landscape formed patterns below us, could that have been part of this convergence design? Indeed, their guide confirmed. The giants chose their final sanctuary precisely because it incorporated a crucial segment of the pattern. From that vantage point, one properly attuned can perceive connections to other realms that remain invisible to those without knowledge. Kratos absorbed this information with measured consideration. Their journey had already led them to numerous locations of mysterious significance, guided by Faye's markings and preparations. If these places formed components of a larger pattern that somehow related to the stability of the realms themselves, their quest carried implications beyond personal resolution or even familial duty. The dwarven role in this knowledge? He inquired, glancing around at the ancient forge that housed the heart. Why is this artifact kept here, in Svartalheim? The dwarf's expression grew more solemn at this question. We are the shapers of connections, he replied. Before the Aesir came, before Odin's obsession with control, dwarves crafted the original bridges between realms, not as conquerors, but as travelers and traders. The heart was our guide in this work, showing where pathways might be established without disrupting natural balance. He gestured toward the surrounding enclave, where the rhythmic work of the forges continued unabated. What you see here is but a shadow of our original purpose. We now craft weapons and armor for gods and heroes because that is what remains permitted to us. But this deeper knowledge, the understanding of how realms connect, this we have preserved in secret. And now you share it with us, Atreus observed, curiosity evident in his tone. Why? Because Fae of the Jotnar saw possibility where others perceived only inevitability, the dwarf answered simply. She recognized in your combined bloodline, Olympian and Jotun, a unique capacity to operate outside the prophecies that bind Norse fate. What she began with her preparations, you may continue with your choices. The implications of this statement hung in the air between them. Since beginning their journey, they had encountered numerous references to prophecies and predetermined fates, particularly regarding Ragnarok and the roles various beings were expected to play in the twilight of the gods. Yet consistently, their actions had defied these expectations, creating outcomes unforeseen by even the most knowledgeable seers. We make our own fate, Kratos stated with quiet certainty, a principle that had guided him through centuries of divine manipulation and attempted control. Indeed, their guide agreed, something like approval flashing in his ancient eyes. And in doing so, you create space for others to discover alternatives to paths long thought inevitable. That possibility, choice beyond prophecy, is what the heart has shown you today. As if responding to this articulation of purpose, the heart pulsed once more with gentle light, its surface momentarily resolving into the spiral pattern they had witnessed in the vision, before resuming its fluid transformations between states. The heart confirms your understanding, the dwarf noted. It will remain here, continuing its work of observation and revelation, but its insight now travels with you in the form of knowledge gained. He reached into his robes and withdrew a small object, extending it toward Ateris. It appeared to be a compass of unusual design, its face marked not with cardinal directions but with symbols representing the different realms. At its center, where a traditional compass would have its needle, rested a miniature version of the spiral pattern they had observed in the vision. A modest tool to assist your recognition of the convergence pattern, he explained. When you approach a significant manifestation, the spiral will align with its counterpart in the physical world, confirming your discovery. Atreus accepted the gift with appropriate reverence, studying its craftsmanship with appreciation. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "We'll use it wisely." The dwarf acknowledged this with a slight bow. "The Enclave grants you safe passage whenever your journey brings you near," he informed them. "The knowledge you seek serves purposes beyond your own quest. The restoration of balance benefits all realms, even those whose current rulers might resist such change." With these words, their audience appeared to reach its natural conclusion. The Heartforge had shared what was needed, and their path forward now included new understanding that would reshape how they perceived their journey. The dwarf guide led them back through the entrance, into the larger cavern where the work of the Enclave continued uninterrupted, the rhythmic sounds of creation forming a soothing backdrop to their passage. As they retraced their steps through the complex network of suspended platforms and narrow bridges, Atreus studied the dwarven craftsman with renewed appreciation. What had initially appeared as simply another example of dwarven industry now revealed itself as something more profound. The preservation of ancient knowledge, disguised as conventional craftsmanship. They're maintaining traditions that connect to the original purpose, he observed quietly to his father. Each thing they create contains elements of the old knowledge, hidden in plain sight. Kratos nodded, noting details he had overlooked during their initial passage. how certain anvils were positioned in alignments that matched segments of the convergence pattern, how the bridges connecting various platforms, when viewed collectively from their current vantage point, suggested the spiral design they had witnessed in the hearth's vision. Preservation through practical application, he acknowledged, respecting the strategic wisdom of this approach. Throughout his long existence, he had observed how knowledge preserved only in abstract form, in scrolls or teachings divorced from daily use, often became distorted or lost entirely. Embedding crucial information within practical skills and everyday objects provided resilience against both intentional suppression and the natural erosion of time. Their guide led them to a different exit than the passage they had used to enter, a tunnel that sloped gently upward rather than descending deeper into the mountain. "This path will return you to the surface near the Lake of Nine," he explained. "A shorter journey than retracing your steps, and one less likely to draw attention from those who might monitor the more common routes." Before departing, the dwarf offered one final observation. The giantess prepared not just a journey, but an awakening. "What you discover along this path may change not only your understanding of the realms, but of yourselves, particularly the boy, whose nature encompasses possibilities beyond either of his bloodlines alone." With these words and a respectful gesture of farewell, their guide returned to the enclave, disappearing among the complex network of forges and workshops that filled the vast cavern. Kratos and Atreus proceeded into the tunnel, the soft blue glow of guidance runes lighting their way toward the surface. As they walked in companionable silence, Atreus occasionally consulted the compass they had been given, watching how its central spiral rotated subtly in response to their surroundings. The tunnel itself seemed to follow a path that incorporated elements of the convergence pattern, spiraling upward in a sequence that somehow covered more vertical distance than their actual walking would suggest. "It's like we're taking a shortcut through the spaces between realms," Atreus observed after they had been walking for some time. "Not fully transitioning like with the Bifrost, but skimming along the edges where they connect naturally." "An astute observation," Mimir commented. The dwarves were renowned for creating passages that utilized these natural convergence points, allowing travel that seemed impossibly efficient by conventional standards. Kratos maintained vigilant awareness of their surroundings, despite the apparent safety of their path. Experience had taught him that transitions between realms often attracted attention from entities that monitored such boundaries, whether Odin's ravens or more obscure guardians with their own agendas. Yet their journey continued undisturbed, the tunnel gradually transitioning from clearly dwarven construction to something that incorporated more natural elements, as if the artificial pathway was merging seamlessly with natural caverns that had always existed within the mountain. "Father," Atreus said after a particularly long stretch of silent walking, "do you think Mother knew about all of this when she sent us to scatter her ashes? That it would lead to discovering these connections between realms?" Kratos considered this question carefully before responding. "Your mother's foresight extended beyond simple prediction," he said finally. "She created possibilities, rather than merely anticipating them." "That's very true," Mimir added. Faye's particular gift wasn't seeing a single predetermined future, but rather identifying key junctions where small actions could open entirely new pathways. Quite different from the fatalistic prophecies that dominate Norse cosmology. This perspective resonated with what they had learned at the Heart Forge, that their journey involved choices that might alter what many considered inevitable. Not direct confrontation with prophecy, but the creation of alternatives not encompassed within existing predictions. The tunnel continued its upward spiral, the air gradually cooling and carrying hints of moisture that suggested proximity to the surface. Eventually, they reached a point where daylight filtered down from above, illuminating a natural chimney in the rock that opened to the sky. Nearby, a series of handholds had been carved into the wall, creating a ladder of sorts that led to the exit. Atreus climbed first, his lighter frame ascending quickly to investigate the opening. "We're near the lake," he called down after reaching the top, "just as he said we would be. I can see the temple from here." Kratos followed, emerging onto a rocky outcropping partially concealed by evergreen trees. The Lake of Nine spread before them, its waters reflecting the afternoon sun, the Temple of Tyr rising from its center, like a monument to bygone cooperation between realms. Another piece of the pattern they were beginning to recognize. As they oriented themselves to determine the most efficient path back to their boat, Atreus studied the compass once more. Its spiral center had aligned precisely with their current location, confirming what the boy had already suspected. "This spot is part of the convergence pattern," he noted, gesturing toward how the shoreline curved below them, how the distant mountains formed specific alignments when viewed from their current vantage point. "I would never have noticed before, but now I can see it clearly, how the landscape itself forms part of the design." Kratos surveyed the scene, allowing his perception to shift slightly as his son had described. Indeed, from this perspective, natural features that would otherwise appear random seemed to arrange themselves into meaningful configurations. Subtle correlations that suggested purpose rather than coincidence. "The realms were connected before they were divided," Mimir observed. "What Odin separated through magic and decree remains linked through fundamental patterns woven into the fabric of existence itself. Your journey appears to involve rediscovering these original connections." As they descended toward the shoreline where they could summon their boat, Atreus continued to identify elements of the convergence pattern in their surroundings. How certain trees grew in specific arrangements, how rocks had weathered along particular lines, how water flowed in currents that echoed the spiral motif they had observed in the heart's vision. "It's everywhere once you know how to see it," he marveled, "like a language written into the world itself." "Knowledge changes perception," Kratos acknowledged, recognizing how their experience in the dwarven enclave had altered how they observed their surroundings. Not through magical transformation of the landscape, but through expanded awareness of patterns previously unnoticed. When they reached the lakeshore, Atreus summoned their boat with a practiced call. As they waited for it to arrive, the boy studied the compass once more, watching how its central spiral continued to respond to their environment, not with dramatic movements, but with subtle adjustments that confirmed their growing understanding. "Do you think we'll find all the parts of the pattern?" he asked his father. "Reconnect what was separated?" Kratos considered this question with characteristic thoroughness before responding. "We will follow the path your mother prepared," he said finally. "Not because prophecy demands it, but because her wisdom earned our trust. Whether that path leads to complete restoration or partial rebalancing remains to be seen." This measured response satisfied Atreus, who had grown to appreciate his father's careful approach to larger questions of destiny and purpose. Together, they had already defied numerous predictions and expectations, creating their own way forward through challenges that many had considered insurmountable. Their boat arrived, gliding smoothly to the shore where they stood. As they boarded to continue their journey, the afternoon sun caught the waters of the lake in a way that momentarily revealed currents flowing in spiral patterns beneath the surface. Another manifestation of the convergence design that now seemed to appear wherever they looked. with Atreus at the bow, compass in hand to guide their course, and Kratos at the stern, steering with practiced strength. They set out across the Lake of Nine. The dwarven enclave, with its hidden heart forge, receded behind them. Yet its revelations continued to illuminate their path forward in ways that transcended mere physical distance. As their boat cut through the water, Mimir broke the contemplative silence. "I've been pondering what we witnessed in the heart," he said. "The convergence pattern isn't merely a map of connections between realms. It's a fundamental structure that predates the current order." Atreus looked up from the compass, which he had been studying with intense focus. "How so?" "Well, lad, it suggests that Odin's careful separation of the realms, which he presents as the natural order, is actually an imposed artifice. The 9 realms weren't meant to be disconnected territories requiring magical bridges for transit. They were originally aspects of a single, continuous reality. Rato guided the boat around a partially submerged ruin, his movements economical yet precise. Though he offered no comment, his attention to the conversation was evident in the slight tilt of his head toward his companions. That would explain why Mother thought this knowledge was so important, Atreus reasoned. If the artificial boundaries between realms are creating instability, then restoring natural connections might prevent, or at least alter the nature of Ragnarok, Mimir completed. Rather than accepting the prophesied destruction as inevitable, Faye sought a more elegant solution, reweaving what had been unnaturally severed. The afternoon light cast long shadows across the lake's surface, the lowering sun painting the water with amber and gold. As they approached the temple, Atrian noticed how the compass's spiral pattern aligned perfectly with their trajectory, suggesting they were following one of the natural pathways embedded in the convergence design. "Father, look," he said, holding up the compass. "We're traveling along one of the pattern lines now. It's almost as if the boat knows to follow it. The paths of least resistance often coincide with these natural connections," Mimir explained. "Water, wind, even light tend to follow these channels without conscious guidance. Your mother likely incorporated such knowledge when planning your journeys, choosing routes that utilize these natural flows." Kratos studied the compass briefly before returning his attention to navigating. "Practical wisdom," he acknowledged, recognizing how Faye had consistently balanced mystical insight with pragmatic application. Her markings had guided them not just to significant locations, but along efficient paths between them. A strategy he could appreciate, regardless of its metaphysical implications. As they circled the massive Temple of Tyr, Atreus observed how the structure itself incorporated elements of the convergence pattern, its proportions, the arrangement of its entrances, even the decorative elements along its exterior walls. The temple was built to enhance connections between realms, he realized aloud. That's why Tyr could travel so easily compared to other gods. Indeed, Mimir agreed. Tyr understood what most Aesir chose to ignore, that cooperation rather than domination offered greater benefits to all realms. His temple wasn't merely symbolic of diplomatic relations, it physically embodied the natural connections Odin had tried to sever. The realization brought new significance to locations they had previously visited during their journey. The ancient gateway in the mountain, the hidden paths between realms, even Tyr's secret chamber beneath the temple, all incorporated aspects of the convergence pattern they now recognized, forming a network of connections that existed despite Odin's efforts to control all travel between worlds. As daylight began to fade, they directed their boat toward a small cove where they could safely make camp for the night. The shoreline there formed a natural harbor, protected from stronger currents and offering sufficient coverage from potential observers above. Once again, Atreus noted how this location seemed to align with the compass's guidance, another node in the vast network they were beginning to perceive. They made camp with practiced efficiency, each performing necessary tasks without need for discussion. Atreus gathered wood for a small fire while Kratos secured the perimeter, ensuring their position remained defensible despite its apparent seclusion. Once basic needs were addressed, they settled near the fire, its gentle warmth a welcome comfort as evening coolness descended over the lake. "I've been thinking about what the dwarf said," Atreus began, his fingers tracing the spiral pattern on the compass's face. "About Mother seeing possibilities where others saw only what was inevitable. Do you think that's because of her giant blood, or was it something more personal to her specifically?" Kratos considered the question while adding another small branch to their fire. "Your mother possessed wisdom beyond heritage alone," he said after a thoughtful pause. "Many giants accepted prophecy as readily as the Aesir, despite their differing perspectives. Fae questioned what others simply believed." "Quite right," Mimir added. "Fae was exceptional even among her kind. Where most Jotnar focused on recognizing patterns across time, she actively sought junctures where intervention might create new possibilities, less a seer than a weaver of potential." The fire's light played across the compass in Atreus's hands, catching the metallic elements of its design and creating the illusion that the spiral pattern was slowly rotating. The boy studied it with renewed appreciation, understanding now that it represented not just a map but a philosophy, a perspective that valued connection over separation, possibility over predetermination. "Do you think we'll succeed?" he asked softly, the question directed toward both his companions. "In restoring these connections, in changing what everyone believes must happen." Kratos met his son's gaze across the fire, his expression stern yet not unkind. "We will proceed one step at a time," he replied, his deep voice steady and certain. "Success lies not in final outcome alone, but in each choice made with clear purpose." "And you've already accomplished what many would consider impossible," Mimir reminded them. "Simply by discovering knowledge that Odin has spent centuries suppressing, you've created potential for change that didn't exist before this day." These words seemed to reassure Atreus, who nodded thoughtfully before returning the compass to the small pouch where he kept his most important possessions. The night deepened around their campsite, stars appearing in brilliant clarity above the lake's dark waters. In the distance, faint lights could be seen at various points around the shoreline. Other travelers or settlements maintaining their own vigils against the darkness. As they prepared for sleep, taking turns at watch as was their custom in unfamiliar territory, Atreus found himself reflecting on the day's revelations with a sense of quiet wonder rather than overwhelming responsibility. The convergence pattern represented connection between realms, between past and future, between seemingly separate beings whose fates intertwined despite apparent divisions. His mother had recognized these connections and prepared a path that honored them. Now he and his father continued that journey, not as pawns of prophecy, but as travelers choosing their own way forward through the intricate web of possibility that surrounded them. When sleep finally claimed him, Atreus dreamed not of destruction or conflict, but of bridges forming between distant shores, of light flowing along pathways that had always existed beneath the surface of perceived reality. In these dreams, the spiral pattern appeared in countless variations, sometimes as small as a fingerprint, other times vast enough to encompass entire landscapes, yet always maintaining its essential nature as a symbol of connection rather than separation. The rhythmic sounds of the dwarven forges echoed through his dreams, not harsh and discordant as the sounds of battle, but measured and harmonious, like heartbeats sustaining life through consistent, patient effort. The crafting of connections rather than the severing of ties, the shaping of possibility rather than the enforcement of limitations. Kratos, maintaining the first watch as his son slept peacefully nearby, found his thoughts returning to the heart's visions. Though wary of prophecy's tendency to become self-fulfilling when too readily embraced, he recognized practical value in glimpsing potential challenges before they manifested. Preparedness had always been his strategy, regardless of whether threats came from prophesied futures or unexpected quarters. What struck him most profoundly, however, was the revelation about Faye's visits to the Dwarven Enclave, particularly her second journey while carrying their unborn son. The image of her seeking insight about the child's potential futures, preparing paths that he might follow long after her physical presence ended, deepened his already profound respect for her wisdom and foresight. She had seen beyond her own lifetime, creating possibilities that extended her influence without imposing control. This approach to legacy differed fundamentally from what he had witnessed among the gods of Olympus, whose monuments and machinations invariably served to reinforce their direct dominion rather than nurture independent growth in those who followed. As the fire burned low, its embers glowing like miniature forge hearts in the darkness, Kratos acknowledged that their discovery in the Dwarven Enclave had altered something fundamental in his perspective, not through magical manipulation or divine decree, but through the natural expansion that comes from witnessing wisdom previously unknown. The convergence pattern spoke of connection where he had long perceived only separation, of flow where he had recognized only boundaries, of choice where prophecy claimed inevitability. These concepts did not contradict his hard-earned wariness of divine manipulation, but rather offered more sophisticated framework for navigating such challenges, one that emphasized relationships rather than mere opposition. When Atreus awakened at dawn to take his turn at watch, Kratos settled into brief but necessary rest, with these thoughts still moving through his consciousness like ripples across still water. His dreams, unlike his son's, contained no visions of future possibilities, only quiet reflection on paths already traveled and choices already made, their patterns now visible from new perspective that revealed previously unrecognized connection. Morning arrived with gentle insistence, light spreading across the lake to touch their campsite with golden warmth. They broke camp efficiently after a simple meal, leaving minimal evidence of their presence as they returned to their boat. The compass guided them once more, its spiral pattern indicating not merely direction but alignment, harmony between intention and cosmic structure, between personal journey and universal pattern. As they continued across the lake toward their next destination, the rhythmic sound of their oars cutting through water created subtle echoes that seemed to resonate with memories of the dwarven forges. Different activities united by shared pattern of measured, consistent effort, gradually shaping reality according to conscious intention, rather than merely reacting to external forces. The Dwarven Enclave of Hidden Fires had revealed more than ancient artifact or forgotten knowledge. It had shown them perspective that transformed how they perceived their journey, not as defiance against fate alone, but as participation in restoration of balance long disrupted, not merely breaking chains, but reweaving connections, not simply destroying what threatened, but nurturing what might flourish when artificial boundaries no longer prevented natural flow. With this understanding guiding them, father and son continued across waters that now revealed patterns previously unnoticed, currents flowing in subtle spirals that matched the compass's central design, reflections capturing multiple layers of reality simultaneously, rather than merely mirroring single surface perspective. The journey remained challenging, the future uncertain, yet somehow more connected. Each moment not isolated incident, but thread within larger tapestry whose design they were beginning to comprehend. And so our journey through the realms draws to a close for tonight. May Hypnos, god of sleep, watch over you as you drift through dreams of legendary proportions. If these tales of gods and monsters helped guide you to restful sleep, consider supporting our journey by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support gives me the strength to continue sharing these stories night after night. Remember, these videos play uninterrupted through the night, with no ads to disturb your slumber, just the soothing sounds of mythic realms to accompany your dreams. For those seeking passage to exclusive content, our Patreon offers early access to all videos and special playlists crafted to enhance your sleep. The link awaits in the description below. Until our next journey together, may your sleep be deep, your dreams be mighty, and your rest be undisturbed by the conflicts of gods and men. Sleep well, brave one.